as we begin this Throwback Thursday, do you remember last season we focused in on clear backpacks? Well, now this year, CCISD is just one of the several school districts that are implementing clear backpack policies, which are required to. The reasoning for this is for safety purposes, for people to create a safe learning environment, like we talked about when we did our drug tests. When we did our drug test episode, which was yesterday's episode. So let's take a look at the 3 new series campus lessons, because they have a lot of campus lessons for us to learn about attendance, truancy, and also the dress codes. But when it comes to your child's education, attendance is very important. I mean, for 6 years on this broadcast, we focused in on a bunch of truancy. And what is an unexcused absence, and what counts as an excused absence. We've also focused on excused versus unexcused. But now CCISD has many resources that could help out your child. And the main reason why the district is implementing clear backpacks. Here's Simone Simpson.
Well, safety is always our number one priority in light of all the recent incidents, in the state and across the country.
Ron Knipes is the Director of Admissions, Attendance, and Student Support Services for CCISD.
So when we were implementing the policy, we looked at other districts' websites. I know Beeville was one, Dallas ISD. There are several others that have implemented the same policy.
Policies that aim to protect students and staff.
400 over 1,000 kids in a school allows them the easy access, they don't have to actually go through the backpack, but they can look at the backpack and make a quick determination that there's something unsafe in the backpack.
But they won't need to worry about backpacks if students aren't in their seats in time for roll call.
We're wanting to find out what the root cause. Why are they not attending? And what can we do to help?
Jennifer Noyola is the district's coordinator for attendance, dropouts, and leave prevention. She says the attendance of the high schools has the district's attention.
So right now, all our high schools are at below 90%. So definitely we need to focus on our high schools. So our attendance officers are at the high schools. And so it's just looking at which students, had that issue last year.
Noyola acknowledges that sometimes students are the product of their environment.
We have placed social workers throughout the campuses, throughout our district. And seeking resources out in the community.
Noyola says initiatives that offer clothing, supplies, and simply communicating can make a difference.
And sometimes it's not a matter of, it's us reaching out to them and letting them know that we're here to help. But we don't want to just automatically take them to court. We don't want to automatically, do that. Like even the judges are looking, what kind of resources, what are we doing?
Students having the ability to advance to the next grade level is only one factor with attendance.
The funding is also needed so that we can make sure that we're providing them with the up-to-date materials.
Noyola doesn't want parents to hesitate to reach out if they need help.
Reach out at the campus level, at the administration building. We will lead that parent to wherever we need to find the resources that they're asking for.
And just a reminder, students absent or missing a part of a day without permission are truant. Truancy is an unexcused absence or partial day absence, which may cause disciplinary action. There are several resources within the district to help parents combat this issue. Visit our website, KIIITV.com, to learn more.
Now, that's exactly what we talked about. Excused versus unexcused. Excused absences are like, I went to court. You gotta provide them with a note. I went to the doctor's office. It's the same thing. You have to provide them with a note. Unexcused absences are things like, I had to go babysit. I slept in. I woke up late. My car broke down. Those are unexcused absences. What's the best absence? It's basically excused absences. It's to where if the child is missing a day or two of school, it can mean this. It can mean that child missed 7 days of school, like we talked about. Truancy court can happen, and Texas is the only state that decriminalizes truancy after what happened back in 2003. Ankle bracelets and going to jail. That's all in the history books. But the county attorney didn't know about that till it was too late. So really, what you have here is basically somebody who just wants to go back to 2003. But it's what the Justice Department says, and the state says. I mean, if it's what the state wants, then it's what the state wants. That's basic common sense. What caused this vehicle to suddenly accelerate, killing this man's wife and their young son? Did the driver hit the gas instead of the brake? Or is there something about the design of these vehicles that could turn them into high-speed lethal weapons? Stone Phillips looks into sudden acceleration. Stay with us. Back in October, during our Season 6, we talked about sudden acceleration. It's to where drivers mistakenly hit the gas instead of the brake. Many people blame the drivers. Many people blame the company. Tonight, you will see that report. On the episode, you saw my reaction to the story with me saying silent. But now you will see the actual story. A tragic story about a car that hit a child and killing the wife. Here's Stone Phillips.
On June 10th was our church picnic, which was to be a kickoff for Bible school, which is to start the next day.
Pastor Jeff Batet and his wife were looking forward to taking their little boy Nathan to the picnic that Sunday afternoon in 1990. As people gathered at the local park in Nokomis, Illinois, a member of their church hopped into this Ford Aerostar van to run an errand. No one could have imagined what was about to happen.
I just looked up and I heard this engine roar. It had a scream noise to it, like it was going out of control.
James Aller says it suddenly lurched forward. The runaway van crashed through a concrete bench, through picnic tables and wooden pillars, heading straight for his wife Evelyn, a Sunday school teacher and mother of 10. And next to her, asleep in his stroller, Nathan Batet.
I couldn't believe what I seen. And the little boy was laying in a stroller this away.
The front of the van had crushed and killed the baby and the teacher. But there was something about the accident no one could understand. The woman driving the van said, under oath, her foot was on the brake, not the accelerator. And there were 4 witnesses who confirmed it, including Evelyn Aller's daughter.
She had that one foot on the brake. I see the brake lights.
If the driver was hitting the brakes, why did the van take off in the first place? And why didn't it stop? When investigators from Ford and the federal government examined the van, they couldn't find any defects. So in spite of the brake light witnesses, Ford concluded the driver must have made a tragic mistake, slamming the accelerator to the floor instead of the brake. And a jury agreed. It echoed the findings of this 1989 government report. Experts reviewed thousands of accidents involving all kinds of cars, not just Fords. Their conclusion? Pedal misapplication by the driver was the most likely cause, that it was virtually impossible for electrical failures to cause sudden acceleration. And that seemed to close the book on sudden acceleration. For years, car companies pointed to the government report and won nearly every lawsuit against them. But lately, there have been a few bumps on the road to blaming drivers. Although the automakers still deny it, juries in 3 different states have ruled that defects in cars were to blame in cases against Audi, Nissan, and General Motors. And as you'll see in the most recent and controversial ruling of all, a judge in Ohio says the Ford Motor Company may have covered up one possible cause of sudden acceleration for nearly a decade. sudden acceleration. Dateline has discovered things you've never heard before.
All of a sudden it took off.
Highly trained drivers, even Secret Service agents, who swear they did not hit the wrong pedal. The two wires, a veteran Ford mechanic who thinks he found a clue to the cause, and internal Ford memos describing wiring problems that could trigger a car to take off on its own. First, a few things you should know. We're talking about a design in some older Fords up until 1995, not the new models in showrooms today. You should be aware that by any measure, sudden accelerations are extremely rare. In recent years, complaints have been falling. Finally, almost everyone agrees some people do hit the wrong pedal. The question is, does everyone? Did this man hit the wrong pedal? After the Reverend Leon Manigault led a Pentecostal church service like this one in Cleveland, his family says his car suddenly sped out of the church parking lot.
My father said the car had just shot off.
Manigault's son John says his father's foot had to be on the brake because he chased the car down the street watching the brake lights flash until his father turned off the key and killed the engine.
He said that's the only way that car stopped.
These repair records show the family complained to a local dealer that the car accelerates by itself. And a few months later, they say it happened again with tragic consequences.
Your shoes off.
Today, the Reverend Manigault is in a coma after the same Ford Crown Victoria roared out of his driveway and into the back of a house. He suffered massive head injuries. His family sued Ford in a case that challenges the carmaker's claim that drivers are to blame.
So mysteriously, we have all these people who are slamming down the throttle pedals. But I can't buy it. Is this correct?
Sam Serro is an electrical engineer hired by the Manigault's lawyers to investigate the crash. And he developed a new theory, how the cruise control can cause some cars to take off without anyone hitting the gas. For years, investigators didn't think cruise controls could be much of a factor in sudden acceleration, in part because they thought the system didn't get any power until you got up to speed and turned it on.
This is a connector.
But when Serro investigated, he found that in tens of millions of Ford-built cars and trucks, some but not all models from the mid-'80s all the way up to 1995, the cruise control is getting power as soon as you turn on the engine, even if you've never touched the cruise control button.
Has instant vehicle power.
Even if the switch is off up on the steering wheel.
Even if the switch is off, yes.
Serro says that's asking for trouble, because with the power always on, a rare combination of two specific wiring problems, shorts, happening simultaneously, can activate the cruise and send the engine to wide open throttle, full power, even from a dead stop.
This thing can, without you wanting. This thing can, without you wanting it to, it can pull wide open throttle.
Have you tested this on a real car?
Several times, yes.
Serro deliberately rewired an old Ford Crown Victoria, adding switches and a system could flip to produce the two wiring problems. In this demonstration, played in an Ohio court, the driver puts the car into gear and without touching the accelerator, flips the switch. The car takes off, picking up speed, the throttle wide open. Serro says you don't have to be a mechanic to understand how it could happen without the switches he added.
This black wire here is a ground.
If this black wire to one part of the cruise control wiggles loose, and then if either one of these two wires gets a nick in the insulation and touches metal in the car, Serro says, hold on. And there's another thing. If this $4 plastic switch, called a dump valve, because it cuts off the cruise control as soon as your foot hits the brake, if it too fails, Serro says the engine stays wide open. Anyone can rig wires, deliberately short things out. Isn't this a lot of things that have to go wrong all at the same time?
No, and what you're talking about in quotes going wrong, all of these things that go wrong are normal wear and tear on the vehicle.
Serro says normal vibration can cause a loose wire to make, then break a connection, even though it looks fine.
It's the same problem that you have when you look down at your indicator panel and sometimes the little lights come on and tell you something, and then they'll go off.
So if it was vibration, it might vibrate its way back into order, you're saying?
Yes.
And that other wire that has to be nicked, then touch metal? Well, Serro says it may not have to touch metal at all if there's water in the wiring. Water?
Yes,
But these wires are under the hood. And what are the chances that water's going to get on these wires?
probably about 100%.
100%.
Oh, yes.
Sarah says the wiring for the cruise control is right in front of the windshield, so water dripping down or simply condensing on the electronics can cause short circuits. And if water does play a role, Sarah says proving it would be almost impossible because water evaporates.
Right after the fault, it could be gone.
Sarah admits the odds of all these failures happening at once are very small, but with millions of cars on the road, even rare failures can add up. And he told the jury that's what happened to the Reverend Manigault's car.
I mean, you're talking, like, 0.01% of all the vehicles. It's very low probability. You say that doesn't sound too bad, but if it's your car, it's real bad, isn't it?
What did Ford say about all this? In court, the company argued that the Manigault family had changed experts and changed theories. Before Sarah, another expert had offered an entirely different explanation because he didn't find any problems with the Manigault's cruise control. And the fact is, Sam Sarah didn't either, because before he or Ford engineers could inspect the car, it disappeared from a storage lot. Ford declined Dateline's request for an on-camera interview, but in this letter, the company told us essentially what it told the jury, that Sam Sarah's test was a contrived stunt with a doctored vehicle, his demonstration, junk science. If real failures caused an accident, Ford said it would leave evidence for investigators to find.
Have you ever seen it in a specific car where you haven't created it?
The problem has always been that by the time I get to see a vehicle, it's had a head-on collision. It's been so smashed up that you can't tell anything from it anyway.
Have you ever seen it?
No, I haven't, not yet.
Ford says Sam Sarah was paid to come up with a problem, and a Ford expert testified that although Sarah's explanation is theoretically possible, in the real world, that can't happen. It just doesn't happen. And Ford showed the jury a test of its own, demonstrating that even if those short circuits sent the engine wide open, and even if that dump valve failed, the brakes could still stop a runaway car. You can see how the front brakes work, even though the back tires are still turning. After listening to the evidence, the jury ruled in Ford's favor, and the judge rejected several appeals. But the story doesn't end there, because there's a lot that jury never heard. This car didn't crash into just any tree. It's on the White House lawn. The man behind the wheel drove in motorcades with two presidents. Dan Childs was an experienced Army driver with a spotless record.
That was kind of frightening.
In 1992, Childs shifted a Ford-built Mercury Marquis into gear to pull in line for a motorcade here at the White House. His commanding officer was in the back seat when suddenly the car roared.
He starts to scream at me that, sir, the vehicle won't stop, the vehicle won't stop, the vehicle won't stop. And I'm looking over the front seat, seeing he is literally standing on the brakes.
Had anything like that ever happened to you before?
No, never.
Were you surprised?
I was very surprised. Scared? Yes.
Without touching the gas, Childs says the car took off. And if he hadn't hit a tree, he says he might have plowed straight into the Oval Office. You can see where it happened if you look at the back of a $20 bill.
Just barely right in here, kind of mixed in with all the shrubbery.
Childs told Dateline he thinks the brakes worked, but when the front wheels hit the grass, they started sliding, while the back wheels kept pushing the car forward because they were still on the pavement. The key thing is, the engine continued to roar, even though Childs swears his foot never touched the accelerator.
Is there any question in your mind
No,
about which pedal you had your foot on?
I had my foot on the brake.
And remember, Childs has a witness.
He physically had both feet on the brake pedal.
And within a year, Secret Service agents were reporting similar incidents involving 3 different Ford-built cars, including one at the vice president's home.
I remember getting in it and putting it in reverse, and all of a sudden it took off, dropped it in gear. The engine revved up, tires squealing.
And the vehicle laid probably 10, 15 feet of rubber in the building. We have a smooth concrete floor.
Did Secret Service agents suddenly get clumsy and start hitting the wrong pedals? Attorneys suing in a sudden acceleration case Ford settled without admitting fault had tracked down the Secret Service agents and other drivers.
To the 20 feet, the vehicle engine just abruptly revved up. The vehicle accelerated.
A Ford public relations man at company headquarters.
pulled it in gear, and it took off, spun wheels, as I recall the situation.
When Mrs. Ford entered, I entered the car.
And it even happened to a driver chauffeuring Mrs. William Clay Ford of the company's founding family.
There was a sudden surge. I immediately hit the brake, but the car did not stop.
These records show Ford was getting so many complaints, as many as 100 a month, it had launched its own internal investigation. But the judge in Reverend Manigault's case never allowed the jury to hear about that, or the White House lawn, the Secret Service, or any of the other incidents. What the jury did hear was a Ford lawyer say Samsero's ideas were purely theoretical and had never happened in the real world. When the Reverend Manigault's lawyer told a different judge that Ford knew about thousands of sudden acceleration incidents, including ones with trained drivers who swear they didn't hit the wrong pedal, the judge issued this blistering ruling, saying Ford had perpetrated a fraud upon the court and may have misled the government. In ordering a new trial, he wrote, "It seems certain that further death and injury is likely to occur unless and until the truth about the causes of sudden acceleration events becomes public knowledge." Ford told Dateline it's appealing what it calls the judge's erroneous and unconscionable rulings. The company says it didn't hide anything, and that its statements in court are absolutely true, that it's investigated every one of the incidents we've told you about, and in some cases the government has as well. And Ford says no one, not even Samsero, found evidence that a mechanical or electrical problem caused any of those sudden accelerations.
And what we had found was the sort
But
of...
wait till you hear what a mechanic at a local Ford dealership says he found. And what the man who oversaw that government report on sudden acceleration says now, after Dateline showed him these internal Ford records.
It makes you think that there is something more substantive to Samsero's theory than just theory.
When we come back, what the top investigator says he did not know about the cruise control system. And you also meet a mechanic who says the drivers are not to blame. Stone Phillips concludes, not so fast. Stay with us. And now the conclusion to our story. We've heard Ford say what about all the incidents that's been described about the White House lawn, the Reverend, and all the incidents that were described in the first part of the story. But you're about to meet some mechanics, and you'll also meet the top investigator who says he did not know about Ford's cruise control system. You'll also see some internal Ford memos that play a different role in this story. Once again, here's Stone Phillips.
By any measure, sudden acceleration is rare, but this mechanic in Boston says he's seen it with his own eyes, not once, but twice.
These are the tire marks right here? Still here after all these years.
Junior D'Amato says one day outside his shop, he heard a crash. A woman's car had just hit a school bus. The back tires were still spinning.
We saw the tires smoking, and we saw the brake lights on at the same time.
So she had her foot on the brakes.
The brake lights were on.
And within months, another customer brought in a different Ford-built car, complaining it too had taken off. D'Amato says he left that car idling outside his shop with nobody inside to press any pedal.
All of a sudden, the engine started to scream and roar.
Just started to roar.
Just like someone was in it and put it right to the floor, yes.
Junior D'Amato is more than a mechanic. He writes a weekly column about auto repair, syndicated in newspapers across the country. When he called Ford back in 1991 to report the problem, the company sent out an investigator, but told D'Amato it couldn't find a problem with the car.
All we're going to do is just loosen it.
So years later, when D'Amato heard about Samsero's short-circuit theory, he says he decided to try it for himself. He showed Dateline how he deliberately loosened that first black wire to the cruise control.
I just unplugged it.
We started the van, but left it in park so it wouldn't actually move. Then we watched as D'Amato deliberately nicked the insulation on one of those other two wires, then grounded it.
And it happens that fast. That fast. Quicker than you can blink your eye. Okay.
Either one of these.
Either one. That's one wire. And this is... Now, is that
actually pulling down the gas pedal?
It'll actually move the gas pedal.
Now, as long as that continues to be there, we're going to keep revving.
Remember, the van's not taking off because we never put it in gear. And the engine is roaring, even though D'Amato never turned the cruise control button on. He didn't have to. Ford admits that in some, but not all, of its models built before 1995, the cruise control is always getting power, even at a dead stop.
Does your experience tell you that this is a reasonable explanation for the sudden acceleration incident?
I would have to go with that assumption, yeah.
Of course, Junior D'Amato didn't find those shorted wires. He created them. But Dateline discovered there's another mechanic who did find something. A wiring problem on a Ford that had suddenly accelerated to a parking lot. Long before engineer Sam Serra was involved in sudden acceleration lawsuits, Larry Miller was the service manager at this Ford dealership in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. In 1990, a customer came in complaining that his new Ford Aerostar had suddenly taken off by itself.
There was no question in his mind, and no question his foot was on the brake.
Correct.
Never on the accelerator, correct?
Robert Mull was driving. His wife Sally was sitting next to him.
And we just flew. We were hitting speed bumps.
After bouncing over the bumps, she said the runaway engine quieted down as mysteriously as it had roared. So Miller says he called Ford's national hotline for help. This is a written record of that call from Ford's own files. It shows how Miller reported the van took off through a parking lot after the engine went to full throttle. The first recommendation from Ford headquarters? Check for chafing on wires from speed control amp to servo. The same wires Sam Serra says could cause problems. And Dateline discovered Ford wasn't just telling Miller. Remember how the pedal moved by itself when the cruise control kicked in? This is another Ford hotline report, same year. A Ford dealer from Virginia calls. Customer says vehicle went to wide open throttle and he could not hold it with the brakes. The recommendation from Ford headquarters? Question customer as to whether the accelerator pedal actually moved or not. If so, check the wiring between the speed control amp and the servo for shorts. Now remember, Ford told that jury back in Ohio that it never found a case in the real world where wiring shorts had caused sudden acceleration, that it just doesn't happen. So why would experts at Ford headquarters be telling a mechanic in the field to check the wiring? Ford told Dateline it was simply telling mechanics about every possibility, however remote.
Where these wires were touching.
But it turns out, when Larry Miller started checking wires, he actually found something. We don't have the original cruise control, so on another one, Miller showed Dateline where 8 years ago, he found 2 wires hidden inside, nearly touching.
The solder joint coming off of this wire had dripped down to where it was almost touching the gray-black wire. And our contention is that when he put it in gear, it jerked just enough to make contact with those wires.
That's just one of the things that would have to have gone wrong. But Miller thought he'd uncovered an important clue.
There's not a doubt in my mind that that's what caused this one.
And he reported it back to the hotline.
Dealer called back to
This all happened when Ford says it was in the midst of a massive and expensive investigation of sudden acceleration. But instead of checking the van for itself, Ford closed the case.
So nobody from Ford came out to see firsthand for themselves what you reported over the hotline?
No. No.
In a letter to Dateline, Ford defended its decision to close the case, finding its car was not to blame. Although Miller may have identified one of the 5 malfunctions that must happen simultaneously, Ford said he didn't find the others. But was Ford already hearing about the other malfunctions, which combined could cause sudden acceleration? Dateline reviewed internal Ford documents, including this one, written 3 years before Larry Miller's call. It lists the problems in some of Ford's cruise controls, including water in the amplifier, open circuits. And remember that plastic dump valve cutoff switch on the brakes? Pinched dump valve hoses. Ford told Dateline it was just a routine list to improve performance, and that Miller didn't pinpoint any of those problems. When all of the facts are considered, the company says, it is clear that Ford acted appropriately when it closed its investigation. But take a look at what this internal Ford memo was saying back in 1990. Even as Ford closed the case, a Ford zone manager was summing it up saying, Larry Miller eventually found a fault in the cruise control which could have caused a sudden acceleration. we found some Ford documents. Dateline took the Ford memos to Michael Brownlee, the former director of defects investigation for the government agency that regulates auto safety. After nearly 20 years with the agency, he left in 1997 to become a private safety consultant. And you should know he has testified as an expert against Ford on an unrelated issue. Brownlee is the man who oversaw that same government report Ford has been pointing to for years to back up its claim that drivers, not cars, are to blame. So did that report really close the book on sudden acceleration?
Do you still believe that pedal error accounts for all of these cases?
No, that's never been my position. That was not the position of the government. The government's position was that a large percentage of these problems are caused by pedal misapplication.
So you're saying that while pedal error may have been the most likely cause, it may not have been the only cause.
That's correct.
Although Ford says it was no secret and should have been clear from the information it gave the government, Brownlee says there's an important fact about Ford's old cruise control design he didn't know.
Were you surprised to hear that the cruise control in millions of Fords was getting power, even if it's off?
Yes, that is a surprise to me, and I don't think I was aware of that 10 years ago, and I don't believe our investigators were either.
And if the problems are caused by vibration and water, as Sarah claims, could that explain why they might go undetected?
Does that make any sense to you?
Well, certainly, water is present in the environment of a vehicle, under the hood and elsewhere. Vibration is a fact of life in vehicles.
So that could explain why the evidence would be so hard to find.
Well, sure, it heals itself. The water can go away, the water will evaporate.
I'm going to throw a switch.
While Ford still maintains Samsero's theory requires a combination of failures that's virtually impossible, Brownlee's not so sure.
Is this a theory that you looked into when you were investigating this?
This is a simpler way for it to fail than that was looked by the government at that time. From a technical standpoint, certainly it's plausible, and that's based not only on Sam Sero's opinion, but other electrical engineers that I have talked to about this.
Brownlee is not endorsing the short-circuit theory, but after reviewing some of the records Dateline found, he says he has a lot more questions he'd like to ask Ford.
It makes you think that there is something more substantive to Sam Sero's theory than just theory.
But there's one other lingering question in this mystery we wanted to ask Brownlee about. Even if short circuits in the cruise control could explain why a car would take off by itself, and even if a problem with that plastic dump valve might explain how an engine could stay at full throttle, what about the brakes? Remember that Ford test? It's compelling evidence. Ford says even if everything does go wrong, the brakes will still stop a car, even with a runaway engine. But we watch the test again. Listen carefully at the end. He's shouting 175 pounds of pressure. That's how hard Ford's test driver pushed on the brake and held it down to stop the car. That's roughly 10 times harder than you'd normally have to push. So hard, even that government report on sudden acceleration concluded that 50% of all women, and even some men, just can't do it.
The bottom line here is that that's a lot of pedal force, and not everybody can push that hard.
Remember the witnesses at that church picnic accident who saw brake lights?
I've seen the brake lights.
So in some of these cases where people say, we saw brake lights, and the driver says, my foot was on the brake, is it possible that they just weren't pressing hard enough, or perhaps couldn't press hard enough?
Yeah,
Bring the car to a stop?
yes, that is possible.
Could that explain why a van driven by a grandmother didn't stop? Or why 67-year-old Reverend Manigault didn't stop his car? We don't know. What we do know is those Ford hotline reports were talking very specifically about wiring problems that might cause sudden acceleration. And after seeing the Ford memos, the man who used to be in charge of safety investigations says the government may want to take a second look.
Clearly, Ford had some notion or some basis for thinking that wiring might be the problem. And this is the kind of information that, of course, one would like to find out more about.
Would you think that reopening the investigation might be in order?
Certainly, this is something that ought to be looked at, it seems to me.
For now, the controversy is headed back to the courtroom. In Ohio, the Manigault family will learn soon if they'll get a new trial. And in the church picnic case, the families who didn't even know about the short circuit theory have gone back to court asking to reopen their case, still looking for answers.
I needed satisfaction to know that I done something to try to ease the pain for my children and done justice for my wife and so forth has to happen.
Dateline sent those internal Ford memos to the federal government, which told us it was aware that cruise control failures could conceivably cause wide-open throttle when it issued its 1989 report. NHTSA says it has not detected a trend in Fords and that there's no basis at this time for opening a new investigation. Remember, the government's 1989 report concluded that driver error is the most likely cause, and it did not find a higher rate of sudden acceleration in cars with cruise controls. In a recent example, a Minneapolis police officer was behind the wheel of a Ford van that took off, killing 2 people. That van did not have cruise control, and federal investigators believe the officer must have hit the wrong pedal. Some people do. The question is, does everyone?
Well, 50%. Well, according to the report, 50% of women say that report. 50% of women say they have hit the brakes. I mean, witnesses may say, "I've hit the brakes. We saw brake lights." There were witnesses who saw the brake lights. I mean, you're pushing 175 pounds of pressure on it. Bam, you're pressing on the brakes. That's simple. So I'm glad I was able to show you this and to give you some common sense perspective about what happened. About sudden acceleration. Okay. Coming up next, we talked about lifeguards during our season 4 premiere, during season 4. Now we talked about this back in 2019. We also talked about this in 2020 and 22. So, we didn't will look into those lifeguards from a common sense perspective. Stay with us. Back in 2015, we focused in on lifeguards. You know, those ones perched above the pool or at the beach. Well, needless to say, we're going to tell you some tips about if you're going to be a lifeguard. Here's some tips what you need to know. First, the number one issue is this. Do not have electronic devices at your disposal. No cell phones, no tablets, no earphones, none of that. Always make sure that you know when you're saving people. Always make sure you know if someone's drowning, you jump in right away and rescue them. That's number 2. Thirdly, don't be looking at other people's behind. Don't be like going off duty without letting people know. I mean, when I was at Parker Pool, there was like 3 or 4 lifeguards. Some of them were in the office and like on break, and then other people were like hopped up on the perch. But just if you're gonna be a lifeguard next summer, know this. You need to know how to save a life. Don't be tuning out. Don't be like heading to the basketball court off duty. I mean, that's when this report happened. I'm not going to play it for you, but for common sense perspective purposes, don't be using drugs. No drugs, no sleeping, no alcohol, none of that. None of it. So you're going to say I'm taking chemicals, and you go outside and smoke some dope. Nope, cannot do that. Lifeguards should not be under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Because there's kids' lives being put at stake from this, because there's people's lives that are being put at risk here by our lifeguards, and you're out there smoking dope, and they're out there smoking dope and drinking booze because of the pressure. I get it. But you have no right to be stinking drinking and smoking. no right at all. No right at all.
My cousin were over.
Sorry about that. Alright. When we come back, we're going to talk about MSG and what you can do. Stay with us. On Christmas Eve, during our season 6, we focused in on MSG. If you go to the supermarket these days, you can find labels that say no MSG. Camels, for instance, why does a major food company like Camels, for instance, feel necessary to tell you that some of their products contain no MSG? MSG stands for monosodium glutamate. If you remember from back in the 60s, that's when most of us heard about the salt-like substance and could give you what was then called an MSG buzz. As I first told you when we first did this back in December, it's come a long way from the supermarkets. It's in fast foods, hot dogs, lunch meats, potato chips, to name a few. But there are ways which you can do, like we talked about on our last Throwback Thursday. On our last Throwback Thursday here, let me see if I can switch to the other channel so that I think we talked about that, but I would show you the report, but I don't want to waste time here. So the FDA is, analyzed yeast, natural flavorants. If you don't, if you don't know what to look for in the supermarket, ask questions. You can look up ingredients. You can look up the amount of calories. You can look at the ingredients in the back of the product. That way you'll know. One of my favorite parts of the story was that one kid who was so misbehaving that the doctor told him to remove all MSG. Grades improved. He was behaving good, and learned how to tie his shoes. Go get him, Tiger. Okay. All right. Now, who remembers Jonathan Taylor Martin? Now, who remembers Jonathan Martinez Garcia? Who remembers Jonathan Martinez? If you don't remember, it was about a year ago when Jonathan Martinez Garcia at age 17, because this happened about a year ago. If you don't remember this case, a year ago, Jonathan Martinez Garcia Jonathan Martinez Garcia could remain behind bars for 40 years old with the vicious April 2022 attack where he attempted to cut his teacher's wrists, then threatened to set her on fire. This is what he did. He sexually assaulted the teacher and Miles is sentenced to at least 16 years in jail. That's according to the New York Post. But it was all because he get the grades up. Now, we looked into this case with a wooden scalpel, but common sense, you start telling you not to do that. Teachers deserve the respect about what they get. And if you remember, who remembers when we focused in on who remembers this? I mean, who remembers when, I got nothing else to say, but in the 6 years that I've done this broadcast, I never heard of such a story that would even knock my lights out. I never would hear of a story like that. But if I did, I would be stunned to hear about a teacher sexually assaulting a student. We focused on students yelling at teachers. The 8th grader there there was an 8th grader right there who yelled at a teacher. So if you were to look up students yelling at teachers, bunch of videos will pop up. That's one of the issues we talked about. Here's the improved version of this one. It's a full video here, but we're gonna play for you when we return. Stay with us. Finally this evening, do you remember when we talked about students yelling at teachers? There was one clip I forgot to show you. And because of Throwback Thursday, I'm going to show you this. It's about a teen who just yelled at the bus driver, used profanity, and ended up stopping the bus and waiting for the police. Take a look.
Bus driver, how long are we gonna sit here?
Until 911, please come.
Okay.
Yeah, please come. You're fucking ridiculous.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said you're fucking F-U-C-K-I-N-G ridiculous. Fucking filling bus. From my fucking bullshit. It's a crazy situation, man. He's gone all violent and crap. He's trying to kill people. Yeah, it's all fuck you and your bullshit. Man, what's really going on about that? My name is fuck you and your bullshit. I want to go for the record to say we could all be home right now, but Rhonda had to stop the bus because I sat with another student. For the record, just by the way, we could all be home. But me...
Be home right now if you had moved out there.
Shut your fucking mouth. I am sick of your shit. It has been constant since I've been on this bus. You have targeted me for the stupidest shit. I'm sitting with a student, no problem at all. All these other students sitting with students, you don't have a problem with that. But when I sit with another student, you immediately tell us we can't sit together. You want to explain why? No reason. No reason. No reason at all. There's no reason why I can't sit with her. And you can't give one, and you know it. This is a bucket filling my bucket with bullshit bus. Because you're filling us with shit. How about you tell the PA how much bullshit you're filling us with? I mean, your job is to simply get in a bus and drive us home. But instead, you make it difficult by complaining about everything. Everything. All the other bus drivers
Young man, nobody else on this bus needs to be tormented by your language or what you...
No one's being tormented on this bus besides you, because you have a problem with everything. No other bus driver has cared.
Apologize to everyone else.
How about you apologize for being a bitch? You take your fucking stupid design jacket and go fucking drive a bus to a juvenile detention center.
There it is.
Bye, man.
Such an awkward angle. Oh wait, I hear it. Roll the window. Yes, you can. Roll the window. Continue that.
Now, this was a short video, but the full video, we're not playing the full video here, but we are going to play it when we do our season 7 premiere. That's during our premiere week. So we're going to have a full lineup for you after Labor Day. So I'll see you then. I'll also see you again for another edition of Throwback Thursday. Actually, we are going to play the full video on our next Throwback Thursday. So you saw an approved a 5-minute portion of the video, but you're also going to see the full video about this on our next Throwback Thursday, which is going to be next Thursday. So that's Throwback Thursday for this Thursday. We'll see you again next week for another edition of Throwback Thursday. For everyone here at YouTube, have a good night.